All right, guys, just a couple of things. I got the crank in place. Our rod bearing clearances were all at 2.5 thousandths, but there was one here. Let's take a look. The number 2 main was actually at 3. So, and the number 5 was at 3. 4, 3, and 1 were all at 2.5. That was our clearances, which is pretty good. That's not bad at all. And I talked about what we were checking here is the vertical measurement. I may have not mentioned it last night, but it's the same thing when you're checking your bore. You want to check the load side. So when you're looking at an engine, what you're going to be checking is where that skirt rides up and down on, which will be if you're looking at a cylinder, it's going to be the 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock position if you're looking at it in this direction. So you're checking the big areas. But what I found is that overall the bores were actually still pretty round, and the taper was only a half a thou. And I measured everything out. Another little thing, I always torque them center out. Check after every single torque setting you do, every single main you do, check the crank, rotate it, next one. Do it again, rotate it, next one. Do it again, rotate it. Why? I have had issues in the past where the crankshaft was machined wrong. They ordered me the wrong bearings, and I also mixed up the wrong main caps, and it was a fucking debacle. And what would happen is I would get to the number 5 main, and that was the wrong one. And then it would bind up, and I fought it. And then I also have had rods that were pressed on wrong, and they would seize up the engine before, while I'm trying to turn it. So anytime you bolt anything down, check it. Make sure everything's still moving freely. That way, if there's a problem with that one, it's isolated. Now, another little tick. No, another little trick here. A lot of people complain about how the number 5 main cap sucks to get off on these Oldsmobiles. Pretty much any engine, I think. The front ones are easy. You loosen up the bolts, you use the 2 bolts, and you rock them, and they slip out. On this one, not so much. It's wide. So what you do is, obviously, you're going to have the crankshaft out if you're measuring like I did. On the opening of the bore, you grab a rubber-handled hammer, and you just boop, pop it up, and it comes right out. If you got the crankshaft in place, you loosen it, and then you just grab a pry bar, and you lightly pull up on the crankshaft. It'll free it up, and it'll come out. And from here, I'm going to measure the rod clearances, and then we can start assembling. But before I start assemble, I have to check my ring end gaps. So you got to check the top and the middle ring, so you got to check them in their respective bores. So I have to tape them all together, what bore they're going to go into, and then I have to check the end gaps of the ring in the cylinder, how they would fit in there. So I'll show you guys a trick for that I picked up over the years. We're going to get cooking on this thing. I think the rotating assembly I should have together in the next 2-3 hours, and we'll go from there, and I'll follow it up, guys. All right, guys, you're going to hear my fan in the background, but it's hot today. Every time I build an engine, it's super hot. So I got this in place, and I'll show you guys. So I have a vise, but I don't have soft jaws. So what I do is I grab rubber gloves, which I use, and drape them over the steel and fold the fingers over so that it protects the rod. Now, you don't need to tighten it on here super tight. And then you just torque it down to the spec. You measure, you're on to your next one. And I would recommend, though, that before you remove them off the vise, to loosen them up. Otherwise, it's going to suck. So this is going to take a little bit of time because I have to do 8 of them. And so hopefully I get these done. But you can see I'm not binding anything up. I didn't over-tighten them. You just got to be careful. And torque them down, measure. On this one, I want to see how still good they are. So I'm going to measure 2 points on this one, just to see how if it's held a tolerance over time, because everybody says that the big rods just move around. So we're going to check it out and go from there. When I tell you guys go back and check your work as you're working, well, you know what I did? In my mind, I forgot, oh shit, I got to put Loctite in the oil restrictors because these were like loose in there. I don't know if they just became loose, if they were Loctited or not, but either way, I had to take it all back apart. And then it made me pay a little bit more attention, and it made me realize the oil feed holes in the bearings were not a direct shot. So I had to open them up with a die grinder, and now we have daylight on all the bearings. You can see it there, on this one you can see it there, and this one you can see it there. So our crankshaft should be happy with that modification. And so after I didn't drill them, what I did was I used a die grinder. I opened them up and then I filed them down to take off all the sharp edges. I cleaned them up so that we would not get any metal shaving material from the babbitt through our oiling system. And as you can see, I didn't do it to this one because it didn't need it. I didn't do it to this one because this one doesn't need it. Only to the ones that needed it. And now I get to put this back together, and now I can check for my piston ring end gaps. We can finally move on. This was just a little, like 20-25 minute delay. Alright guys, an old piston ring is a tool. So you can see my rings are all set and they're pretty good. The ring acts as a perfect square stop for it. You remove it, you check your end gaps, and you're done. And you have to do that for all the rings, just to at least know where you're at, which these are going to be probably fall right in a place where they kind of should be, based off of the style of rings. I have used these before, and for street engines they usually fall right in between like 19 or 20 or something like that. But I'm going to go ahead and still measure them out and see where I'm at. Okay, so I set the rings they were too tight. They would have been fine for the street. It fell right there, but you know what? I'm using the Mondello book for reference here, and what he was recommending back when he wrote this book was 24 to 26 for bracket and all-out competition in the top ring. I set mine at 25. I figured go right in the middle, we'll be good. And I got my 25 thou feeler gauge in there, and we're good. Got it here, and it slides in and out, we're good. And then, so I'll show you guys. It's going to be kind of hard to do with one hand, but essentially, I just mounted this. I've had this for years, but I always mounted it with screws and washers to something I can remove it from. Now that I actually have a workbench, I have it actually in place. So you grab your rings, and then you push them in here, and you make sure they're square, and then you turn it, and you file them down until they're good. And then sometimes you might have to go back and square them up. You know, you don't always get a perfect push on it, but you know what? You clean it up, and then you deburr it. So I'm deburring it with 400, which is finer than our cylinder finish. So you want to file it down with something that is less abrasive than your cylinder wall finish. So that way you don't scratch anything up, and because you get really, really rough edges when you file them down. So that's what I'm doing right now. I got 2 cylinders done on the top ring. I have 6 more to go, and then we got to do the second rings. Underneath the top ring we got to do still. So I'm gonna let you guys go, and again, this is gonna take me a little bit, and then after this we can start assembling. So just a quick tip: when you file your rings, when you're done and you found your gaps, just push them down. That way you don't have to organize them. And then you do your next ones, just push them down, and then when you go to assemble cylinder per cylinder, you take your your top ring out, your middle ring out, and then you go ahead and you do your thing, and that way you can keep them organized. So I'm going to finish up the second ones, flip the block over, do the other bores, and be done. Okay guys, I am done with the rotating assembly blueprinting. I set up the top rings to 25, the second rings to 31. That puts me within the tolerance that Mondello recommended. And I did that for a reason. If I got it a little too tight, I could still go up and give myself enough room to where I won't completely fuck up the ring. Usually most people will tell you, run what the ring manufacturer recommends. It was really hard to find their specs, but I went with the Mondello specs because I'm trying to keep a certain level of consistency. This engine was built pretty much doing a lot of the Mondello tricks, the restrictors, the notching of the rods, the oil spit hole on the rod bolts, So when I talked to the guy who originally built it, that's what he told me, and I want to maintain that level of consistency because this engine has lived this long, and it's still in really good shape. So no reason for me to not follow that same procedure, which is kind of standardized in that manual. So from here, I'm going to take a lunch. I've been out here for about, I'd say about 3.5 hours, blueprinting everything. So if you take into consideration the amount of time I had in it last night and everything, I'm talking about almost 4.5 to 5 hours just measuring every little thing. It takes dedication. So when you guys pay someone to build an engine, do keep in mind, not only are they going to take their time machining it, but they also have to check the parts just like I am while they're machining it. And when most people have engines built, you better ask for a spec sheet. I have mine here. And actually, a lot of my old spec sheets, I use this as a folder, are in here. This is for that small block I'm running, and there's another one for another small block I did. And then there's another one in there from another small block I did. So I got a bunch of spec sheets in there. I hope you guys have enjoyed the video from here. I'm going to start assembling the rotating assembly. I'm going to put the cam in it, degree it. I have to send the end play. And then from there, hopefully I can put the heads on. I'm going to do a quick checking of the CCs on there. I'm just going to check one because I know the heads have been milled. They have been reworked by a good source. And I just want to see what they're at on one for at least just to see where everything's at. I forgot exactly what the CCs were, but those heads were shaved. And what I'm going to do is, I'll show you. Even though I've done this video before on this, I'm going to do it again because I'm going to check these. So we're pretty much on par to get most of our bulk assembly done today. So far so good. So guys, hit the like button, share, subscribe. You can follow me on Instagram as Copper Cutlass. I had a bunch of people actually recently started following me on Instagram. I have been leaving that out. But you can follow me over on Instagram, and I share a lot of my work that I do at my work. I do collision repair. So I'm going to cap it off, guys. I'm going to go get lunch. I'm hungry, and then I'll hit it again.